The question of why Custer failed at the Battle of the Little Bighorn has sparked considerable debate among historians over the years. Many modern discussions tend to portray him as a psychopath or egomaniac, obsessed with the ambition of becoming president. This narrative suggests that he attacked the Indian village in Montana solely out of self-interest, casting him as a complete failure. However, this perspective doesn't tell the whole story. Custer possessed remarkable skills and was instrumental in saving the Union during the Battle of Gettysburg. Not just once, but 3 times. He was, in fact, a competent officer who made significant contributions. Back in the 1960s, I remember hearing about the Custer battlefield, what it was called at the time, hosting these West Point ride-alongs. They'd bring cadets out to study the battlefield, retracing Custer's movements on that fateful day in 1876, stopping at various points to discuss what Custer knew and why he made certain decisions. The surprising part was that the cadets and military professors generally agreed with most of Custer's decisions, which stood in stark contrast to the growing belief in the 60s that Custer had made a series of critical mistakes. So, what went wrong? It's complicated, and there's a lot of debate. But I'll try to break down how seemingly sound military decisions led to such a disastrous outcome. There are 4 key questions that need to be addressed. Why did Custer really fail? Were the Native Americans better armed? Or were they? Was there really a white man dressed as a Native American fighting on the Indian side? Why were the Native Americans so hard to spot during the battle? I reached out to my good friend Paul Andrew Hutton, who spent much of his life studying this battle. I told him about the West Point ride-along where everyone seemed to agree with Custer's decisions and asked for his take. His response was insightful. Essentially, yes, Custer was following standard military doctrine, but his characteristic brashness was his downfall. His biggest mistake was splitting his command without understanding the sheer size of the Indian village, which we now know was one of the largest Native American encampments ever. With about 10,000 people, Custer had been brash before, and it had worked in his favor, like at the Battle of Gettysburg, where he acted without waiting for orders and helped save the day. But this time, his decision to divide his forces and send Major Marcus Reno to attack the village while he searched for another crossing point proved disastrous. Reno's attack was met with fierce resistance, and his troops were quickly driven back in disarray. Custer, unaware of Reno's situation, was effectively operating blind and walked right into a trap. Making matters worse, Custer's subordinates failed him at every turn. Both Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen testified during the inquiry after the battle that they didn't hear any gunfire coming from the direction of Custer's troops. But multiple witnesses contradicted this, saying they heard the shots clearly. Reno and Benteen's failure to act likely contributed to the disaster. At the time of the battle, U.S. troops were armed with single-shot Springfield Model 1873 rifles. While these may seem outdated by today's standards, they were effective for the cavalry tactics of the time. Cavalry didn't fight on horseback, they rode to the battlefield, dismounted, and spread out, using the superior range of their rifles, which was about 600 yards. This firepower initially helped keep the native warriors at bay. However, the Native American warriors were armed with Winchester repeating rifles, which had a much shorter range of around 200 yards but could be reloaded much faster. In open ground, the Springfield's longer range would have given the U.S. soldiers an advantage. But in the tall grass of Montana, the native warriors were able to get close without being seen. And once they were in range, they overwhelmed Custer's men in close quarters combat. One of the most surprising aspects of the battle is how our modern image of it has been shaped by Hollywood. We often imagine native warriors in full war regalia, moccasins, buckskin, war bonnets charging the cavalry. But Custer himself noted in a report after a previous skirmish in 1873 that it was often hard to distinguish friend from foe. The U.S. government had issued European-style clothing to Native Americans living on reservations. So many of the warriors looked like regular troopers. This made it difficult for Custer's men to tell who was on their side. Further complicating the fight, the Native Americans also used hit-and-run tactics, popping up from the tall grass to fire at soldiers, then disappearing again, combined with Custer's decision to split his forces and his subordinates' failure to support him. This led to the catastrophic defeat we now know as Custer's last stand. Another controversial aspect of the battle is the reports from soldiers on Reno Hill about sharpshooters from what's now known as Sharpshooter Ridge. Sharpshooter Ridge was about 600 yards away, and it turns out that the Native American warriors had taken rifles from Custer's troops and used them against the soldiers. They started picking off soldiers, mules, and horses one by one, the troopers believed, and one even testified that there was a white person, a renegade American, fighting alongside the Native Americans and disguised as one of them. A white man was indeed found after the fight, which fueled the belief that he was the sharpshooter. However, this belief was rooted in racist assumptions that no Native American could be that skilled with a rifle. But here's the thing, the Native Americans had an advantage. The warriors on both the east and west sides of Reno Hill were pointing their rifles skyward and firing. It may sound random, but with the soldiers lined up side by side, they were essentially firing down the line, and any shot could hit someone. One trooper, who we'll discuss in a moment, claimed his friend from Milwaukee was taking off his jacket when he was hit in the heart and died. Another soldier, Charlie Bostwick, had his rifle stock shattered, which saved his life. In 1989, after a wildfire swept through the area, archaeologists and historians descended upon the battlefield and found a sniper's nest. They discovered about 75 bullets from a Sharps rifle and several others from Winchesters, around 44 in one position. The Native Americans had engaged in a devastating firefight at Reno's position, not to mention wiping out everyone under Custer's command, which numbered about 200 men. In another strange twist, one of the Native American participants, a woman named Mary Crawler, testified that when Custer came down, he was trying to find a place to cross the river and attack the village. His plan was a classic pincer movement, with Reno attacking from one side and Custer coming around the other. The village wouldn't stand a chance if the plan had worked. However, Custer couldn't find a good crossing. According to Mary Crawler, when they went down into Medicine Tail Coulee, a beaver dam had made it nearly impassable, and 3 officers lost their lives there. For a time, people believed that Custer had been killed at that location and then carried back up to the ridge where he died, though this is no longer believed to be true. Still, the idea that a beaver dam might have contributed to Custer's downfall sounds almost too far-fetched, but it's true. Another point about Custer's brashness. During his career, he had 12 horses shot out from under him in battle. On that day, he was riding his 13th horse, which was also shot out from under him. And this time, he wasn't so lucky. It brings to mind the old saying, "Your greatest strength is your greatest weakness." Custer's brashness made him famous, but in the end, it led to his death. As Charlie Windolph wrote in his memoir, "I fought with Custer. We caught glimpses of white objects lying along the ridge that led northward. We pulled up our horses. This was the battlefield. Here, Custer's luck had finally run out." Windolph lived until 1950, just think about that. In fact, in 1947, the esteemed historian Robert Utley, who was working at the Little Bighorn battlefield at the time, interviewed Windolph, who had been at the battle. Fast forward to 2019, and I had the chance to interview Utley. That's 2 degrees of separation from Custer and Crazy Horse. In conclusion, everything that could go wrong did. What had worked before didn't. The tall grass, the Native Americans dressed in clothing issued by the U.S. War Department, their access to modern weaponry, the work of beavers, and the incompetence of Custer's subordinates all contributed to the disaster. I hope this gives you a better understanding of what really happened in June of 1876. It's certainly an eye-opener.